So welcome into the Monday Morning MotoGP podcast live here on TikTok. And then later on, if you miss it here live, we repost it over on YouTube. So please subscribe there as well. Today we are going to be talking about the stupid season. Yes, the silly season is over now that Jack Miller has signed with Pramac Yamaha and we know who all the riders are going to be for 2025. But the stupid season has just begun, because they just announced the 2025 calendar, and we're going to see how many of these races we actually do. And already one has fallen off the calendar. I will explain later. We're also going to talk about toxic reporting in sports and in MotoGP in general that really made me realize that we're the problem. It's not the riders. We're the problem. We're also going to talk about the Japanese manufacturers, whether or not they're actually making strides to the front, or are the latest results a little bit misleading. And finally, probably first up, we're going to talk about the crash fest that was the Indonesian Grand Prix. All that and more ahead on Monday Morning MotoGP right here on TikTok Live. Like I said before, we're here every Monday morning after a race weekend in MotoGP. And then we repost this on YouTube. You can go to the playlist. You can see all the other pre-recorded podcasts so you can catch up and you feel all the talking points. This is not a recap video. These are the talking points that came out of the weekend. If you need a recap video, that's going to be posted later today on TikTok and YouTube as well. So here we go. Indonesian Grand Prix, very, very entertaining, especially if you like riders hitting the deck. In the first lap, we had Jack Miller wiping out a whole slew of riders. We had him wiping out Aleix Espargaro, Alex Marquez. Who else got torn up in that? Luca Marini, I believe, got involved in that. And then throughout the race, we just saw a lot of crashes. Only 12 finishers of the 21 starters. Miguel Oliveira we lost before the race even started. And so technically, we only had 21 finishers, 21 starters, and then 12 finishers. So technically, if you want to count Miguel Oliveira, we had 10 guys that did not finish the Indonesian Grand Prix this weekend, which is kind of a high amount, considering that if you finish the Grand Prix on Sunday, you got points. And so every time something like this happens, we want to analyze why. Why so many crashes? And we've seen this before. Was it Austin? We saw a lot of crashes last year, and we see this mostly when there's no grip. Like in Barcelona, the riders really complain about how low grip the track is and how easy it is to make a mistake. And that was kind of said pre-race in Indonesia as well, is that the track isn't used a ton. So the pavement is a little green. It doesn't have a lot of grip in it. The rubber has to go down. They have to lay the rubber down through practice and qualifying and trying to bring the grip of the surface up. Now the problem with that is that, yes, you'll gain some grip on the surface on the racing line, but if you veer off the racing line, you might be in some trouble. So if you make a mistake, you're off on more of a greasy, dirty part of the track. And if you try to pass someone, you're obviously not on the perfect racing line. You're taking maybe a defensive line, you're taking a wider line to get a better run. And those dirty lines make you crash. You just don't have the grip outside of the racing line, and I think that's where we saw a majority of the crashes this weekend. We saw a lot of slow turn 16 mistakes. We saw mistakes all over the racetrack, and it's not uncommon in a track like this, but it does start to beg a question of when we go to these places that are going to be very, very hot, like Indonesia and India, if we ever decide to race there again, and Malaysia and Thailand, the time of year we're racing there and just the tracks in general aren't getting used as much. Like, what can we really do to make these racetracks safe to race, but also so that more than just a few riders finish? I don't think any of us want to see 10 or, well, technically 9 DNFs on race day and 10 non-finishers, including Miguel, on a race weekend. I think we want to see racers finish. I mean, it's really hard to look at the final results of this race and go, oh my gosh, I could be happy about my results, knowing that 9 racers didn't finish the race. And I think last time this happened, I can't remember the exact track. We had like, 10 DNFs. And a lot of people were like, oh, this is an embarrassment for MotoGP. We can't even finish races. And obviously the conditions to an amateur, they're not really going to understand why all these riders go down. But it is partly to do with how hard these riders are pushing and how tricky the conditions are when it gets so freaking hot. We have these sticky slick tires that can only do so much if the surface isn't cooperating. I think the track temperature on Sunday was something like 130 degrees Fahrenheit. That's hot. That's melting your tires on the grid, let alone when you're going 200 miles an hour. And so putting Indonesia aside for a second about the crashing, because it was a lot. There was a lot of crashes. But I do think we are also seeing a lot of crashes this year in MotoGP, namely between our two championship leaders. We see Jorge Martin go down a bunch. When he's leading the championship, every time we think he's going to run away with the championship, he crashes. Every time Pecco seems to claw his way back into the championship, he crashes. And these are not bozos. These are very, very good riders. And so why does it seem like what they say in the commentary is true? Oh, no one wants to win this world title. They just kind of keep letting each other get their way back into it. And I think the answer lies in actually how good the motorcycle is that they have with them. They are riding so fast this year. The combination of the GP24, Ford Ducati, and these Michelin tires, I think gives these riders so much confidence. They are pushing so hard. We're seeing them break track records everywhere. And it gives them a ton of confidence to push that hard. And we have two riders who are fighting tooth and nail for a title on the same exact motorcycle. They're extremely talented. They're both riding at the top of their game. And when you give confidence to a rider who's at the top of his game, he's going to squeeze every ounce out of a motorcycle. And therein lies the problem, is that the difference on the GP24 to breaking the all-time track record and being in the gravel is razor thin. These guys are ultra confident in the front end of this motorcycle until they're not. And I think you look at it every single time one of them throws it away. They kind of have to go, yeah, I made a mistake. I did this, I did that. Oh, I lost the front. I think for the most part, these guys don't really know why they're losing the front on this bike. It just goes because they are pushing so hard with so much confidence right up to that limit. And then they go over it. I mean, we saw it with Pecco last week where he's just so fast mid-race. Where did the pace come from? He's nowhere, he's so fast. I mean, qualifying lap speed in the middle of the race on worn tires and then pushing just a little bit too hard goes down. We saw it with Enea Bastianini this week. Didn't have the greatest start to the race. Mid-race, he starts turning in qualifying laps. He was going to catch the leaders. Loses the front, crashes out of the race. And so we're seeing that when these guys really, really push, it's brilliance or it's bend. And the difference is just so thin, maybe thinner than it's ever been. Because these guys are pushing each other to be this hard, to ride this hard on the limit in order to make mistakes. So I don't think it's Pecco and Jorge and Enea are super, common crashers. I think it has to do with how hard they're pushing and the fact that feeling the limit on this Ducati feels an awful lot like pre-crashing, if you will. And so when you're that close to it, and the other guy is that close to it, we're seeing mistakes being made. I think it's pretty much as simple as that. I don't think it's a problem with the sport. I don't think it's a problem with, anything anyone is doing. It's just these guys are racing each other very, very, very hard. And you see it at the beginning of the races. Jorge Martin gets such a great start, and the other riders feel like they have to try to go with him or else he's just going to be gone. They want to make a race of it. And so they're pushing out of their skin a little too far to make a race out of it. And we see Jorge Martin wanting to pull that gap. wanting to just get out in front and ride his lines and not have to worry about anyone dive bombing him, pushing a little bit too hard. Pecco said it about him in the press conference after the sprint, that it just looked like Jorge was just going too fast, was just pushing too hard. And that's a subjective opinion from Pecco, and we're going to get into that in a second. But from Jorge's mind, I wasn't going too fast. I think I can go that fast because I have the confidence in the motorcycle, until the motorcycle was thrown down the road. And I think that has a lot to do with why we're seeing so many crashes in MotoGP this year in particular, but also with these two guys at the front, is that everyone is pushing very, very hard. Everyone wants to be up at the front, battling with Ducati. No one wants to see Ducati win every single week. You think Pedro Acosta wants to finish second? No, he's pushing very, very hard. But even he has to learn the limits of his motorcycle, and the fact that pushing hard and ending up in the gravel is not as good as pushing, let's call it pushing medium and finishing second. But when the margin for error is so small and the championship is as tight as it is, we're going to see mistakes. And I think we're going to continue to see them through the end of the season. It's going to be a very unpredictable finish to the 2024 season in MotoGP. So the next thing I want to talk about is whether or not the Japanese manufacturers are actually getting closer, or is this just an optical illusion? Because it seems like at a glance, Fabio Quartararo and Johann Zarco, to name the two Frenchmen who are riding Japanese motorcycles, seem to be doing a little bit better in the last couple weeks. Now, at Misano, I chalked Fabio's success up to a track that has very, very good grip, because the Yamaha needs grip to go. That's basically their Achilles heel. They cannot get the horsepower they have to the ground consistently lap after lap. They're lacking some corner speed, they're lacking some horsepower, but really it does feel like the constant complaint with the Yamaha is rear end grip. And Misano had a ton of grip. It was a very grippy circuit, the conditions were great, and they had tested at Misano, they had tested again at Misano, they had run a race, they ran a second race. I mean, you have all the data you can possibly want on this racetrack if you're Yamaha or Honda, and Fabio Quartararo looked a little stronger than normal. And I was excited because I'm a big Yamaha fan, but I also had to temper my expectations because it felt like it might be one of those one-off scenarios where this track gives them the data they need, gives them the grip they need to make it seem like they're a little closer to the front than they actually are. And I thought Indonesia was going to be a real test for Fabio Quartararo in particular, because it is a low grip circuit. It's not used that much. It's greasy offline. Could he actually keep it upright? Could the Yamaha compete, get into Q2? All those things they need to do to make it look like they're a little closer to the front than they have been all year long. So for me, Indonesia was a pretty good litmus test because it's very different than the conditions we saw at Misano. But there we go. We had Yamaha under Fabio Quartararo. We had Johann Zarco riding the Honda a lot closer to the front in practice. We even saw Luca Marini and Joan Mir in the top 10 of practice at one point this weekend in Indonesia. So we saw them much closer to the front than they have been all season long. So it made me kind of wonder, is anomaly, is it track conditions? Are they actually closer? And we saw on the sprint and the main race that Fabio Quartararo was kind of fighting in that mid-pack. He made a mistake in the sprint, makes contact with Franco Morbidelli, but in the main race, he finishes 7th. So you're like, oh, a top 7. So recapping the weekend for Yamaha, he goes straight through into Q2. He's in the top 10. I think he was 6th. He qualifies 6th. Pretty stinking good for the Yamaha so far. He finishes 7th. Okay, he drops a spot from his qualifying position, but, racing is racing. And we have to still admit that they're fighting with a machine that's not as good as the KTM, Aprilia, or the Ducati, of course. But finishing 7th sounds impressive until you take into account that 9 people didn't finish. So what do we have to look at to tell if the motorcycle is actually getting better? And I don't think a lot of people really know how to look at that. They look at the finishing position. Oh, he finished 15th, he finished 6th, he finished 4th. Oh my gosh, he's getting so much better. But each race has its own circumstance. And I don't think you can just look at a P7 finish and go, oh wow, it's all fixed. Because we did have Marc Marquez going out with a mechanical ahead of him, and Enea Bastianini crashing ahead of him. 9 riders didn't finish this race. So P7 isn't where we should look. So where should we look? Aha! I got you. The thing that we should be looking at, and the thing that the teams look at when they are deciding whether or not they're moving forward, is actually how many seconds off the race win they are. How many seconds behind the leader are they finishing? And that will kind of tell them, gauging kind of where they are. It'll help them gauge where they are in the season. So if you're consistently finishing a minute 35 seconds behind the leaders, and all of a sudden that jumps up and you're consistently much, much closer, even if you're still in P10, that's telling you that the field is getting closer and that you're getting closer to the front. So a P10 in one race, it can be very different than a P10 in another race. So how is the Yamaha doing when you take that all into consideration? Well, if you take the first round in Qatar, the Yamaha in the main Grand Prix, I think, was 17 seconds off the race win, which is a lot. 17 seconds over the course of an entire race is not a great place to finish. They're not finishing where they want to be. And unfortunately for Yamaha, for the most part, it gets worse. Over the course of the first run of races in MotoGP, they are finishing 24 seconds off the lead, 24, 30, 20, 32, 20, 22, 17. There's a 43 in there. There's obviously some DNFs in there. Now, last week at Misano, he finished 20 seconds off the lead. Remember, he ran out of gas, had some trouble, should have finished a little closer to the lead, but it was 20 seconds. This week in Indonesia, in a track that I did not expect them to go well because of the low grip, they finished 13 seconds off the leaders, which is their best of the season if my calculations are correct. That's 13 seconds off the race win. Now, granted, Jorge Martin did roll off a little bit at the end, but for how fast the pace is, 13 seconds off the lead is what Yamaha is going to be looking at going, okay, that's the best we've had all season long. Here's what we're doing better. Here's what we're doing different. This looks like progress. So I will say it looks like both Yamaha and Honda are showing signs of life, finishing closer to the front than they have in previous seasons. So that P7 looks a little more legit when you take a look at the times and realize, oh yeah, 13 seconds off the race lead is a lot different than 43 seconds off the race lead. On a track that personally I did not expect them to go all that well at. Yes, the track has some conditions that maybe suit the Yamaha style, but again, low grip, dirty off track, or dirty off the racing line, very different than Misano. They haven't had a lot of testing time in Indonesia. Fabio Quartararo is riding the wheels off it, but both him and Alex Rins were able to stay up. Fabio Quartararo finishes 7th, and it does seem like whatever they're needing to find at Yamaha, they're finding bits and pieces. And now we have to see going forward, can they consistently stay in the top 10? Can they consistently get straight through to Q2? They have to be finishing, let's just be honest, Yamaha has to be finishing in front of Aprilia and KTM and even Ducati satellite bikes. They're a factory, they're a full factory team with full factory money. They can't be beaten by independent teams on a consistent basis. We can't have the European Cup and the Japanese Cup in MotoGP. We got to get these manufacturers back to the front. And so Yamaha has to basically look at themselves and go top 10, straight through to Q2 every single week, trying to qualify at least on the front 3 rows, hopefully in the front 2 rows. They need to figure out the qualifying. Even when the Yamaha was slow, they were always pretty good in qualifying when they were running their own lines, high corner speed, even though the straightaways were not that great. They were still there with 1 lap speed, and that has kind of disappeared. So if they can get that back, they can qualify well, they can finish top 6, top 7, that gives them steps to get back towards Ducati rather than just spinning their wheels. And I think we all want to see that. We all want to see all the manufacturers more competitive. We want to see every manufacturer win a race over the course of a season. We don't want to just see Ducati winning every single race with maybe an Aprilia being brilliant to have to win a race. And so hopefully this is a good sign. We'll see in Japan. We'll see how they do in the wet. That's been, kind of Achilles heel for them as well. But I think they're looking at the rest of the season going, okay, here's where we're strong. Here's where we're getting stronger. Here's what we have to work with. As long as you have a direction for the motorcycle, then you can breathe a little easier. Because otherwise it's tough sledding. So today I want to talk a little bit why I think that we are the problem in MotoGP. And when I say we, I mean the viewers, the media, the people that comment and talk about MotoGP. And I think this is kind of a sports-wide thing, but it really stood out to me this weekend in MotoGP, where it just felt like the commentators were doing everything they could, and the media was helping, to start beef that isn't there. And then they act, oh yeah, I know, we know you guys are good friends. We're just, we just saw this little thing and we thought, oh, maybe there's some beef there that we can like pick at like a flaking scab. So if you don't know, on Saturday, Jorge Martin crashed in the sprint race. Pecco was right behind him, and Pecco said on Saturday, yeah, I thought Jorge was going a little too fast in that corner. I didn't think he was going to be able to hold it. I know he was trying to pull a gap and lead the race, but it just felt like he was being a little too aggressive. And then Jorge Martin kind of responded and said, no, I didn't think I was going too fast. I think I was going my pace. I made a mistake. It happens. We'll see what happens on Sunday. And the media, immediately was like, oh, these two shots fired. Oh, look at these slams and destroys and ruins and all these stupid clickbait headlines you see. Oh, Pecco destroys Martin with his comments. I mean, it's just so insanely ludicrous when you consider what was actually said. So now in sports we have a thing where if a rider says something, says, I think Jorge Martin was going a little too fast and that's why he crashed. And then the rider responds saying, no, I don't think I was going too fast. I think I had it handled. I made a mistake. But we'll see on Sunday. Oh, diss battle time. No. That's how humans talk. Humans make comments when they're asked questions, and then humans respond to comments. It's like having a conversation. If they were in the same room and Pecco said, oh, it looked like you were going a little too fast, or Martin said, no, I don't think I was going too fast, I just think I made a mistake. That's just a conversation. But now it's media controversy. Now it's, oh, they're at each other's throats. Oh, it's going to be a good race tomorrow because they're at each other's throats. I'm going to share something with you. The race on Sunday is not going to be better or worse if the riders are at each other's throats or trying to verbally jab each other. The race is going to be the race. These guys are going to race really, really hard, regardless of how they feel against each other, about what they said in the media. I'm sorry, y'all. You're not that important. You really aren't. And personal beef doesn't make these guys ride harder. Winning championships makes these guys ride harder. Now, do they look for places to have extra motivation, to shut up the critics, to shut up the other riders? Of course. But what I felt was so silly, was so ridiculous, is we got to Parc Ferme at the end of that Sunday race, and you could tell Jorge Martin was gassed. Like, we saw what happened to him in India last year when he fainted in Parc Ferme. This guy doesn't love the heat. And that was a hot race, and he was gassed. And Pecco Bagnaia came over to congratulate him in Parc Ferme, and Jorge Martin didn't acknowledge him right away. Pecco was trying to get his attention. Jorge was kind of looking straight on, and then he saw Pecco, and they gave a little bit of a bro hug, and they kind of hugged it out, and they talked it out for a second, and the commentators were like, oh, icy reception between these two. Oh, Looks like a less than friendly interaction in the Parc Ferme between these two riders. Oh, what is going on? It must be from these comments. Oh, this controversial comments that happened this weekend that both are just, oh my gosh, they're just enemies now. Shut up. Shut up with this. This is such a stupid take. If you look at that moment, you can see Jorge Martin is absolutely gassed. He looks at Pecco and he's just like, fuck, man, I am tired. And then literally has to push himself off the railing to give him a hug. The two smile, they make eye contact, they have some words that didn't seem icy or upset or cold. We've seen what happens when riders are cold to each other. It's a no-look handshake. So this. Yeah, sportsmanship and all that. But we've got to stir the pot, right? Reporters have to have something to write about. And it just feels like we're in this moment in journalism and sports journalism, especially, where every headline has to say, it feels like it's a requirement right now, every headline has to say, Pecco Bagnaia slams Jorge Martin for dirty riding, or Jorge Martin disses Pecco Bagnaia for comments about the sprint. None of that happened. None of that happened. I'm going to say it to you right now. None of that happened. They even asked the guys post-race. They're like, so there's been a lot of stuff that's been said about the last 24 hours. And, Jorge, do you feel like you've got redemption? And when he said, yes, I got revenge, which is going to be the headline. Oh, Jorge Martin gets revenge. It had nothing to do with Pecco's comments he's getting revenge on. He was getting revenge on the Indonesian circuit, that he crashed out of the lead last year in the Grand Prix, and he crashed out of the sprint. And he finished the race. He brought it home. That's the revenge. His revenge was against the track. I know that's not as sexy as a headline as he gets revenge on Pecco Bagnaia and takes a commanding lead at the championship and stuffs it up his nose. I know that's not as sexy to say he got revenge for the track he crashed at in a headline. I get it. But the manufactured beef that comes across in all sports is so tired, y'all. It's so incredibly tired. I'm exhausted by it. If riders have real rivalries, okay, they have real rivalries. We've seen on TikTok, even 10 years later, how the Rossi-Marquez rivalry is still alive and well. Those two guys obviously don't like each other. There's history. You can see it on and off the track. They've said things about each other that are real bites and barbs, and we've seen all the famous quotes, little fucking bastard, or whatever Rossi called him, and Mark trying to shake his hand, and Rossi saying no, and all that stuff. We've seen it. We know what beef looks like. We're not stupid. But I feel like we're all kind of stupid for believing anything when it comes to this sort of, oh my gosh, what's the beef? What's happening? It doesn't always have to be a diss. Sometimes people just say things and the other person responds. Weirdly, that's how conversation works. Do we have so few conversations in our lives that we no longer recognize when a conversation is happening? And it's not like these guys are just walking through the paddock going, I think Martin was too fast. They're asked questions by the media. They're expected to respond. They get criticized when they don't respond to the media. If they told the media, that's a dumb question, guys, stop it. They get a little heat. So they answer your stupid questions. And they answer them and answer them again in every language they can possibly think of. They're not just walking around throwing barbs at each other. I remember a quote last year, someone on Reddit was like, oh man, I really don't like how much Fabio Di Giannantonio is talking this year. Last year he didn't say anything, and this year he just seems to be talking about everyone. It's because the previous year he wasn't winning races. He wasn't relevant, so no reporters were asking him questions. And when you're a little more relevant, you have a job and your job isn't at stake, people come and ask you questions about things that aren't your job, and then you have to comment. Unless you're just going to be a no-comment machine. So people would ask Fabio Di Giannantonio about Marc Marquez, and he'd say, "Oh yeah, no, Marc Marquez. I've seen his data. It doesn't blow my mind. It's just he's very, very fast. Oh, he doesn't think Marc's an alien anymore." No, he was asked a question, and he responded like a human being. He wasn't starting a battle with Marc Marquez. That's stupid. And I think the reporting, I know it's all about clicks. I get it. I know about clicks and likes and follows and shares. I know about all these things. But I'm tired. And I'm tired about conversations being interpreted as off-track battles. They're just not. Because I think we all can recognize when two people in sports really don't like each other. We all know what that looks like. We've seen it before. And the rest of this is just nonsense. And y'all can stop. And finally, we have put the 2024 silly season to rest. Jack Miller took the last available seat at Pramac Yamaha. Miguel Oliveira took the seat at Pramac Yamaha before that, which means the entire grid is full. So silly season over, which means it is time for the stupid season. And what I mean by the stupid season is, well, the calendar for the 2025 season has just been announced. And if we have learned anything in the last couple years, is that what was announced is not what's going to happen. We saw it this year. Argentinian Grand Prix canceled. Probably should have never been on the schedule to begin with. Canceled. Kazakhstan canceled. India pushed to 2025. 3 races already out of the 22 they were trying to run never got off the ground. And they were scrambling to try to, oh, well, we're going to go here, we're going to go there, oh, we're going to have another race in Qatar, we're going to have another race in Misano. It's a mess. And it comes from MotoGP wanting to expand, wanting to run new races in new places, reach new fan bases, satisfy fan bases that have been underserved. I get it all. But sometimes it feels like they put the cart a little bit in front of the horse, trying to pull off a race like Kazakhstan when the country in no way is ready to host a race. Nothing against Kazakhstan personally, but all indications say that this area is not ready in any way to host a MotoGP race, to bring the entire paddock across the world and sit them down in a place with limited resources for hotels, hospitality, the track facilities, all that stuff has to be worked out. And it just feels like the schedule folks over at MotoGP put the schedule together with a lot of hopes and dreams. And then you're like, wait, what? So the stupid season, in my opinion, is where we find out how many of these races we're actually going to run. Because 22 races in a 12-month calendar in MotoGP is a lot. 22 races, 22 sprints. It's a lot of motorcycling. All over the globe, it takes a lot to actually pull off. Are they going to be able to pull off all these races? Already, as the calendar was announced, we have our first omission. We have our first stupid season dropout. Because prior to this, what was said is that the Indian Grand Prix wasn't canceled out of 2024. It was just pushed to the top of 2025 to give the organizers a chance to get their stuff together and race back in India in 2025. Well, no, that's not happening. MotoGP will not race in India in 2025. We are yet again pushing it to 2026. So we already have our first casualty of stupid season. So let's just run through the calendar. Let's talk about how many of these races are actually going to be pulled off. We have the Thai Grand Prix starting off the season, which I love. I love the fact they're starting in Thailand. I really hope I'm there. I think that race will probably happen. Argentina in the second spot, less likely. It didn't happen this last year. They're still having political issues there. They're still having poverty issues this year. Are they going to be using government funds to bring MotoGP there? Can they sell out the circuit? So many questions. America Grand Prix is week 3. I think that'll happen. Qatar, Spanish Grand Prix, French Grand Prix, British, Aragon, Italy, Dutch Grand Prix, German Grand Prix. Then we go to the Czech Republic. I'm really hoping that one sticks on the calendar. I think it will. It used to be there. I don't really think there's a reason to pull it off. Austrian Grand Prix will probably happen. Hungarian Grand Prix, the track has to go through some changes apparently in order to host the race. And I think the same is true with the Czech Republic, and you can all check me on that, but pun not intended there. I think both of those racetracks have to be kind of reoriented a little bit as far as like the runoff areas, the hospitality, stuff like that has to change in order to actually race there. So the Czech Grand Prix and the Hungarian Grand Prix are not just givens. Like, we could see one of those races being canceled because the track or the promoter doesn't live up to the promises made. That is really where the problem lies. Is that these two big organizations, you have ticket sellers and event organizers in a specific country, and then you have Dorna, MotoGP. They make agreements and promises are made on both sides. And then promises start to be broken on both sides. I'm not pointing fingers. I'm really not pointing fingers. I'm just saying that when things are complex, sometimes the racetracks overpromise. Sometimes Dorna overpromises. And then we get closer and closer to the actual Grand Prix date, and both sides have kind of made promises they can't keep. And if they've made too many of those promises they can't keep, someone else steps in and goes, well, we can't have this race. You have, IRTA coming in and saying, hey, the racetrack isn't safe for the riders. You have Dorna coming in and going, hey, we're not getting paid. India, we're not getting paid for this. We're not coming again until we get paid for the first time we were there. So that's where we get some of this, tension, is that places like Hungary says, yeah, no, we can extend the runoff. We can do this. We can add a paddock building. We can do this. Of course we can do it on time. Of course the construction only takes 6 months. And then 8 months from now when the construction's not done, stupid season. GP's canceled. Replaced by a second Misano Grand Prix. Maybe. After that, we go to Catalonia, San Marino, the Japanese Grand Prix, Indonesia Grand Prix, Australia, Malaysia, Portugal, and ending in Valencia. The only thing I can see for the end of the calendar is always, the weather in Australia, it's going to be windy. The rain in Japan and Indonesia could be sloppy. But other than that, it looks like the calendar might be more doable than in past seasons when we're trying to go to new places like India and Kazakhstan and Finland and all these other places that we were trying to work into the MotoGP calendar. And I think a lot of it all seems to have good intentions. They want to bring racing to places that racing hasn't been. They don't want to race 7 races in Spain. They want to bring it to the world. But it does seem like you need to bring it to the world on the backs of more than just hopes and dreams and promises. It needs to feel like permanent solutions are made, that places are ready to race. And if you're not ready to race, maybe next year. Like India. We'll see. All right, that does it for the Monday Morning MotoGP podcast. Please make sure here on TikTok you are following, sharing, mashing all the buttons, and then go over to YouTube and subscribe to the channel there. Help us grow there. This is done every Monday after a race weekend. We talk about the talking points for MotoGP, and if you miss it live here on TikTok, we then post this over on YouTube, so you can subscribe there. You can see all the MotoGP podcasts we've done for this season, and all the other fun stuff. So join us next time, and we'll see you after the Japanese Grand Prix.